Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate minority leader for the Republicans, had a closed-door meeting with Senate Republicans on Wednesday. In that meeting, he starts talking to them about the politics around the deal concerning the border, the deal that ties Ukraine aid, Taiwan aid, Israel aid to border aid. He's saying, you know, the politics on it had flipped, that it isn't what it used to be, that a few weeks ago, you know, we would have been very easy in getting this through, would have been fine, everything was great, everything was peachy keen. Where he was saying, like in the week leading up to this, that Republicans were getting a deal that they probably wouldn't be able to get in other circumstances. Lindsey Graham was backing that up. They were getting, in some instances, real concessions, to the point where certain progressives were getting angry at the concessions the Biden administration was making. And so Mitch McConnell said last week that they would have a deal by the end of this week. Well, now it's Thursday, and in this closed-door meeting on Wednesday, Mitch McConnell started talking about, look, the politics of this has changed. Donald Trump hasn't seen the deal. Nobody else has seen the deal, but he, which makes it even worse, what I'm about to say, but he wants to run on the border. And since he wants to run on the border, if we make a deal with Biden on immigration, that could give Biden a victory on immigration for the campaign trail. And if we give Biden a victory on immigration on the campaign trail, that could stunt Trump's campaign. Therefore, we're not going to make a deal unless the Democrats accept every single request the Republicans make in relation to border policy, which of course they will not, because Democrats ran against the Republicans in 2020 against Trump because they disagree with him on border policy. And as much as the Republicans, you know, are proud to control the Senate, just barely by like 2 votes right now, the Democrats still control, they control the House barely, just by 2 votes right now. Democrats still control the Senate, and Democrats still control the presidency. So they're not going to get a better deal in the future, but disregarding the fact that this could empower a Trump presidency down the line, or that this could still help them try to achieve some of their objectives, if they're saying that, hey, the country's being flooded and flooded and flooded with undocumented immigration, despite what my perspective on that belief may be, if you truly believe that, if you could do anything to stem the flow of that tide, especially if you get it as a freebie after leveraging a national security priority in order to get it through, you should take that as a political victory. Well, I think it's probably bad for the country overall, since you're tying 2 separate issues, and this could create crises down the road where every single time we try to approve Ukraine aid, we got to spend like 30, 40, 50 billion dollars on the border and pass Republican priorities. That's a disaster waiting to happen. But at least we'd get something through. No, Trump wants to run on immigration. Therefore, don't make a deal with the Democrats on immigration, even if it would move forward on priorities that Republicans and their voters care about. You know what this is, right? This is choosing party over country. From either our perspective or their perspective, it's choosing party over country. From our perspective, it's very clear that we wanted to support Ukraine. It's important for European security. It's important for the future of Ukraine. It's important for us upholding our commitments and making sure that nuclear non-proliferation treaties that we sign are upheld and they're respected and they're not disregarded, and that we don't want other nations to take the lesson from this, like, hey, if you give up your nukes, or if you don't have nukes, your sovereignty and your borders and the lines around them are just completely artificial, and everybody can take them over at any point and nobody can do anything. And so there's a bunch of reasons, as I've talked about on many other times, as to why I think that this is choosing party over country, and this is a bad idea, even tying these 2 things together in the first place. But now, from their perspective, if you want to learn about my perspective on it, I explain it much better in probably a million other videos. But from their perspective, this is very interesting. From their perspective, this becomes even less justifiable. If you're a Republican senator and you were elected on a mandate to try to deal with the border, i.e. try to stem the flow of undocumented migration, if that was your goal, and you know that Biden's going to be president for the next year, and in that year, more people are going to come, and you could get policy compromises now that can lessen that tide or could address some of the issues you have, why not pull the trigger on that? I often hear Chip Roy, who's one of the most pretty far right Republicans, but he can at least have some political sense, and others complaining about the fact that when Republicans go back to the district, they don't have anything to brag about or anything to campaign on outside of, you know, the Trump agenda of revenge and the same old, same old. There's nothing that they legitimately got done while in office. They can point to some things like bipartisan priorities that were done during the first two years, like the Infrastructure Act, but those were Biden priorities. The majority of Republicans in many instances voted against them. It was only like 10 or 11 Senate Republicans that voted in favor of it, and that was before they took over the House. When it came to Republican House control, they spent the majority of their time fighting with each other over who the House Speaker should be and over whether if they should even negotiate and compromise with the Democrats to begin with. If your priority is stemming the flow of migration, why would you not accept a deal that gives you some of the things you want? If it's just because Donald Trump wants to run on it on the campaign trail and it makes Biden look worse, then this is quite literally rooting against the pilot. That's what we're doing here. You know, after every election, I hear like a tide of old man sayings to make us all like feel good as we start a new term, and it's usually along the theme. I'm not going to say them all the phrases, I don't remember them all, but it was along the theme of, even if he wasn't your candidate, you root for him to succeed because we're all part of the same country and we all want to do fine. We all want to succeed. We all want to do well. This is the opposite of that mentality. They're the opposite party. I want them to fail. I hope by the end of their term, the country's in the gutter so I can come in and project myself as a savior. And not only do I want that to be the case, from their perspective, what they believe about immigration, they are going to stop them from advancing policies that they think are better for the country just to undermine Biden, undermining the nation's security from their perspective for another year, just so they can get an extra advantage on the campaign trail. And what happens if they lose, by the way? Then they get nothing. Because if they lose, and let's say they lose the House, Democrats have the Senate and the presidency, they'll have no reason to compromise on anything, on literally anything. Now that's, by the way, I do also want to put out there that outside of it helping Trump from a campaign perspective, there are probably, to some extent, people who just don't want this aid to go through, period. And when I say probably, I mean 100%. We're talking about Matt Gaetz. We're talking about Mike Lee. We're talking about Lauren Boebert. We're talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene specifically said that if Mike Johnson passes Ukraine aid, she will have a recall vote. Now, whether that's the case or not, or if she's just banging her chest, I think what has happened here is they have taken Trump's priority, which is getting reelected, put that over every other priority, and combined it with a small cadre of people who don't want the aid to get through at all anyway. And since the majority is so small and the Trump cult so powerful, they just back off this deal. Even though they were the ones who tied border reform and some compromise on the border to Ukraine aid in the first place. But even if they did that, look what Senate Republicans are now saying. Look at this. Senate conservatives are turning their opposition to an emergency bipartisan deal that would fund Ukraine and address border security, declaring it a stinking pile of crap. They asked for it in the first place. This is like asking for like a strawberry milkshake. You take a sip and you're like, oh, I hate strawberries, and then you throw it away. This is the type of stuff like 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds do to the parents to frustrate them, but this isn't what grown-ass men do after months of Senate negotiations on a compromise on the border. Months of negotiations, months. To the point where senior Republicans were saying they were getting compromises they didn't ever expect. And the reason they said it, because the Democrats, from their perspective, from Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell's, and the people who negotiated this deal's perspective, they did it because they genuinely wanted to get aid to Ukraine through as fast as possible because time was of the essence. And you want to know what the worst part is? And I don't even know if this is not the worst part, but this is like the cosmic horror comedy part. McConnell has responded to this 180 from Senate Republicans and House Republicans because Trump said jump, so they jump. McConnell has responded by floating splitting Ukraine aid and border security amid the infighting. Because if the problem is that they're not getting enough compromise on the border and they're not helping Trump's campaign, then just split these two issues. But wouldn't this just be immediately what we wasn't this what we started with? Did we just negotiate from October, and this is the cosmic horror element to me, all the way into February almost? We're negotiating this deal, negotiating, adding immigration funding, adding new policy here, new policy there, compromise here, compromise there, only for us to end up right back where we started, and Mitch McConnell asking if we can just vote on this all separately like we should have in the first place. That's a little frustrating, isn't it? Now, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't even know if McConnell thinks it's going to work. In fact, McConnell, and this was 4 hours before stream, McConnell is now saying after that meeting on Wednesday and talking about, oh, well, you know, maybe we can try this other path and we just split it again. He's now trying to redouble his support for the Senate deal so he can try to get some compromise, because he probably realizes, again, that choosing Trump over the country from their perspective on immigration makes no sense to their voters, makes no sense to the constituents, and makes no sense to win over the people who are never Trumpers right now, who are saying that Trump makes everything about himself and this is a campaign of revenge and this isn't about Republican campaign priorities or Republican policy priorities. And then you respond to them by saying, oh, wow, really? Well, here's Trump again choosing himself over Republican policy priorities. This isn't going to win them over. So from a keeping the party united standpoint, from a policy standpoint, from just going back to your constituents and showing that you've achieved something standpoint, from the amount of compromise he's getting, not going to be available, even if Republicans win. And this is the Republican strategy. This is what Marjorie Taylor Greene or others are saying, that don't worry, don't find any compromise, because Trump will win in 2024, and when he wins in 2024, he'll do everything we want on the border. Number one, that assumes he wins. Number two, that assumes that if he does win, that he's going to win a majority in both the Senate and the House. He's going to expand the House majority, which is unlikely. And if he does expand the House majority or keep it at the very least, he also has to take back the Senate. So that assumes all of that. But even if he does that, if he achieves all of that, in order to get a lot of the policy priorities he wanted to get through, and he was unable to get through in his first 4 years, both because he was a clown, he kept firing everybody, but also because he didn't have a supermajority, he still will not have, no matter what he does, no matter how amazing the campaign is. If the economy crashed tomorrow, which I think is unlikely since we just got a report tomorrow that the GDP growth rate is 3.3% this month, which is 1.3% more than what was expected. He won't have a supermajority in the Senate. You need 60 votes for a supermajority. They're not going to get that. And so many of the policy campaign priorities that they're saying that they could get just by electing Trump is not true. Some of the stuff by executive order, yes. Stuff that it will be long-standing structural reform that cannot just be undone by the next president, that will be more difficult. So I think McConnell might realize that. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said during a private meeting Thursday that he still supports a border security deal linked to Ukraine aid, according to GOP senators who attended, delivering a crucial boost to talks that are getting more complicated by the minute. McConnell has spent the past few months significantly focused on getting billions of new dollars to Ukraine. So normally such a pledge would not be earth-shaking. Yet some Republicans woke up Thursday wondering if their bid to link stricter immigration policy to foreign aid was still viable, after McConnell on Wednesday delivered a candid assessment of the challenges posed by former President Donald Trump. At the tail end of the Senate GOP's last meeting of the week, however, McConnell removed any doubts. He is still forcefully pushing for a deal that would pair new border and immigration restrictions with money for Ukraine. It's a crucial piece of McConnell's legacy, and the GOP leader isn't letting go at this stage of the game. Senate Senator Tommy Tuberville, a Ukraine aid skeptic, said McConnell's comments on Wednesday had somehow gotten flipped around, and a day later, he just tried to get it straight. Some of the senators came out and kind of misconstrued on what he was talking about. For me, it was certainly clarifying. He made clear that he has been supportive of Senator Langford. Senator Langford is the one who's negotiating his negotiating efforts, and that we should be supportive of any work, a product that leads to greater border security. Still, McConnell is clearly at an inflection point with his own party. He has no working relationship with Trump, who is racking up endorsements from GOP leaders and consulting with Speaker Mike Johnson on how to handle any border deal that may emerge from the Senate. Many of McConnell's own members of Ukraine are Ukraine funding critics, and Johnson counts many more skeptics in the House GOP. Yet McConnell is clearly determined to keep maneuvering towards a politically feasible compromise to boost Kiev's fight against Russia, which stands to serve as a capstone to his record-setting leadership of the Senate GOP. Senator McConnell has not changed his point of view, said Senator John Roger Wicker. McConnell's remarks on Wednesday amounted to dispassionate analysis, Wicker explained, and I don't think anyone disagreed with him. We are at a particular set of crossroads and intersections. McConnell reminded Republicans on Wednesday of Trump's desire to avoid any deal-making on the border before the election. Okay, so McConnell isn't giving up on the deal, but the deal certainly looks very difficult. When I'm seeing like senators who want the deal to happen saying, oh, 50-50 chance we get a deal by the end of this week, and that was before Wednesday, the odds are not that gigantic. Now, I'm not saying that the odds are any deal is on aid is gonna be blocked and that it's impossible that aid gets through. What I am saying is that there's a good chance that even if we get aid through, that this will not be the mechanism to do it, and that it's going to take even more time than we thought, and that this fight is going to go into February if we don't get a deal this week or the next. And we were told that a deal was likely this week by this man. One other person I wanted to show you who had to react to the fact that Republicans are not taking the border policy compromises in order to help Trump campaign. Again, choosing Trump over country. Bizarre. I wanted to show you this segment where Mitt Romney responded to the update.
Do you think this is what he wants, the issue, Donald Trump? This is what he's doing?
I think the border is a very important issue for Donald Trump, and the fact that he would communicate to Republican senators.
By the way, site chats. Danabo tells me site chat's working now.
And Congress people that he doesn't want us to solve the border problem because he wants to blame Biden for it is really appalling. But the reality is that we have a crisis at the border. The American people are suffering as a result of what's happening at the border, and someone running for president ought to try and get the problem solved, as opposed to saying, "Hey, save that problem. Don't solve it. Let me take credit for solving it later."
But that is the cold, hard reality on Capitol Hill. Getting any deal through on an issue as complex as immigration would be complicated to begin with. And then when you have the party's likely standard bearer coming out and saying, don't cut a deal done on immigration, that will convince many Republicans to listen to their standard bearer and say that it is not time to cut a deal. Let's wait on this issue. And then all the major issues that go along with it, funding for you.
How do you campaign, though? How do you campaign on the border after rejecting a deal that would give you many of your border priorities? How do you campaign? Because I remember the pitch was Biden's done nothing on the border. But if Biden's like putting out his hand and offering things in some instances, I don't even think you should be offering. And you just bat his hand away after you asked for him to reach your hand out to you anyway. You were the one who asked him and then you beat his hand away. How are you going to then next week be like he hasn't done anything on the border? Well, you stopped anything from on the border getting done by torpedoing the one deal that would deal with a priority for many Republicans, both Republicans and basically all of Democrats, Ukraine aid, and something that's a priority for basically all Republicans and a decent chunk of Democrats.
Issues that go along with it, funding for Ukraine, funding for Israel, funding for Taiwan, all we're supposed to tie together in this massive package, including these new border policies that they hope to get out of the Senate as soon as this week, and then try to get it over to the House, where the politics are even more complicated over there, given the Republican-led House and the alliance of the GOP leaders there with Trump, all spells potential doom for this almost must-pass package, potentially punting this into the next year as Republicans and Democrats, John, try to figure out what's next.
Manu, I just want to focus on Mitch McConnell for a second and how big of a change this is in such a short period of time. Yes, he was pushing this because he really wants the money for Ukraine, but McConnell has also made clear that this deal on immigration is the best deal Republicans could get, in a generation. It's more of what they've been asking for in a long time. Just a few days ago, he was saying this, and now he's saying, forget it.
Yeah, he's bowing to the political reality here. In fact, behind closed doors yesterday, we're told that he, in fact, read a quote out loud from Donald Trump in 2018, talking about the very issues that they're negotiating in this process.
It's fucking bizarre. Like, hey, here's Trump saying this is the stuff we need, and these are the things that are exactly the same that we got, and now he's saying not to take it because it would hurt him politically. I couldn't imagine being somebody. Imagine being somebody in there that's not just fear mongering about brown people. Like, you're actually one of the Republicans in here that buys it. That buys it. And you've got to go debate with people about whether or not you should pass stuff for your constituents or pass laws only in reference to whether or not it makes Trump happy.
A trio of senators are trying to cut a deal on immigration. Republicans believe they've gotten a lot. McConnell is trying to make the point that Trump tried to get these things while he was in office and couldn't do it because of Democratic opposition. Now Democrats have moved, he says, towards a Republican position on this issue, and they say that this is the opportunity to get this deal at this key moment, particularly as Joe Biden recognizes his own vulnerability on immigration. But the politics so complicated here, and the fear among...
Fuck off. The politics are not complicated. I'm sorry. The politics are not complicated. Trump does not want Biden to make a deal on immigration because then it could possibly undermine his campaign strategy of running on immigration. Therefore, he's choosing his campaign over getting the things that all of his constituents and that his movement was based upon in the first place. It just shows that Donald Trump's main priority above everything else is himself, and it has always been himself. And these policies and these positions are just a means to an end.
Trump and his allies that cutting a deal could give Joe Biden something to campaign on, clearly driving the negotiations, clearly driving the political reality and the legislative outlook here on this major issue, John.
Well, we'll find out if there are even negotiations anymore after what McConnell said and where Trump stands at this point. We'll have to see what happens next. Manu Raju, thank you very much. Keep us posted.
Okay, that's enough of that. I do have one piece of good news, though, outside of the aid being held up and the negotiations only getting that much worse, is that the U.S. Senate committee did back, and it was 20-1, with the only vote against it being Rand Paul, basically completely bipartisan outside of Rand Paul, backed a bill to seize Russian assets to send them to Ukraine. Now, we've talked about before the $300 billion in Russian assets that are currently frozen, Russian central bank assets are currently frozen all across Europe and some in the United States. Now, it seems the United States is moving forward with the idea of just seizing the assets and giving them to the Ukrainians. And this is the way I do think it should be done. Now, the United States seems to be moving towards doing that, but we only have $5 billion worth of Russian central bank assets in the United States. Meaning that's all we could get together to give to the Ukrainians. Most of the money, I think like 288 billion out of the 300 billion is in Europe. And a lot of it is in Belgium. But the European officials are much more scared to just straight up seize these assets. It might be because the Russians have threatened to seize Western assets in response. I would say that they've already done a lot of that anyway. So it's kind of just, what you reap, what you sow. I mean, they did do, do you guys remember WhackDonald's? WhackDonald's, Russia. No, not McDonald's, WhackDonald's. No, it just mean it. Yeah, but this thing right here, WhackDonald's. WhackDonald's. But the European officials are scared of either their assets being frozen, escalation, whatever it is. They are not so on board with just seizing the assets. Now, that doesn't mean they don't want to do anything. Their solution is, instead of seizing the assets, let me see if I can go down here and find the, here it is. The EU has been discussing ways of providing Ukraine with a windfall tax on profits generated by the frozen assets. In October, Belgium announced it would create a $1.8 billion fund for Ukraine, financed by the tax revenue from interest on frozen Russian assets. What the fuck is this nonsense? Look, this is okay. This is a little bit of money, but let's be clear. The goal is to make the Russians pay for repairing Ukraine. So either it's going to be the Russians paying for it, it's going to be us paying for it, or it's going to be the Ukrainians paying for it on their own, which is going to come with, that would be a disaster, but could come with a decade of destitution. So someone has to pay for it. And if we're having trouble right now politically getting Americans to getting the American Congress to send over money, send over aid, send over support to Ukraine, why are we going to undermine an ability to use another resource, another fund, another group, another collection of funds in order to pay for repairs, especially since that money that's going to come from that is from the person who did the damage in the first place. If the goal, if we're going off of the Ukrainian 10-point peace plan, is eventually for Russia to pay for reconstruction, why not take the money that we have now to pay for reconstruction, or pay to fight and win the war so there'll be less things that need to be reconstructed? It's kind of hard to, I heard from one person like, well, maybe we could use the central bank assets as leverage to make them pay. So what? We're going to hold up $288 billion for the hope that we will give it back to them, and then they'll give us $288 billion. They're currently bombing Ukraine. They're currently bombing Ukraine right now. Ukraine needs the money right now. They don't need it necessarily tomorrow. They will need money tomorrow as well, but they especially need it today. I don't see the purpose. It feels like we're half-assing it, either because it's just another example of escalation management, but I don't think this is an example where we need to engage in escalation management. There's no scenario where we seize these assets and the Russians respond by upping nuclear readiness. They could respond with their own economic consequences, but none of them are going to be as significant as what we could do in the other direction. It makes no sense. Hold the money now for the hope that later that they'll pay. No sense to me. Also, the Ukrainians said the money would cover 80% of current reconstruction costs. So, again, we could get that money to them right now.